we are here in Quincy with Allie Lymenstull. And it's a little bit of a windy day, and what I wanted to do was to spend a few minutes interviewing Allie about the history of rowing in Quincy. And so what we'll start out with, if you don't mind, Allie, is let us know about how it was that you got involved in rowing here and what family members you had who were involved in these programs.
Well, we had my mother's one brother was in that winning team that went to the St. Louis World Fair. And my dad's brother rode here, my dad rode here. And I've been coming down to his boat club since the baby in my mother's arms, in reality, you know.
How early in your life were you actually able to get into a boat?
Well, I joined the club down here in 1938. I was 16, and at that time you could join if you were rowing.
And when you started rowing, was it part of a junior program, or?
Well, yeah, you start out in the junior 8 and the barge and the junior 4, you know.
Was it the Southside Boat Club back then?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's been the Southside Boat Club since 1886, I think, when they first started down the river here about a block of that first old building.
I'm wondering, back then, when was it that the rowing competitions would occur?
Usually over the July weekend, July 4th weekend.
And where would in the Quincy area, where would the competition start and end?
Well, it depended. If it was a Central States main regatta, it would start up the river about a mile and a quarter, and they'd finish opposite the club here.
And was this right in front of the club where the finish line would be?
The finish line was right here, yeah.
So you'd row downriver?
You rowed downriver. And then afterwards, they had another one where they'd start down above the dam here, which was about a half-mile run. And again, you ended up here in front of the club to finish.
And how many people would typically turn out to watch a rowing race?
We'd have the banks full along the river here. Yeah. We'd have the banks full of people watching.
And what cities would participate where they would bring crews in to race against Quincy?
Yeah, well, let's see, Central States Rowing Association, they had St. Louis Rowing Club, the Central Rowing Club, and the Creve Coeur Rowing Club. There were 3 of them in St. Louis. And Southside here, they had Chicago, Detroit, and then in later years, Springfield got involved. And as I remember, that was more or less the Central States Rowing Association.
Now, and in that group, it seems like Quincy was one of the smaller, if not the smallest city.
Yeah.
How did Quincy do compared to those bigger population cities in competing against them?
These old Germans were tough and competitive. You look at the names on them pictures, you know.
So Quincy held its own and then some?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
I understand that when you were a young man, the Quincy just happened to put together, I guess it was a 4 that went into international prominence.
Yeah, they went to Leeds, Belgium. Lost by about 2/5 of a second.
For the World Championship?
In a world competition, yeah.
And was this a kind of thing where people were paying attention in Quincy?
Oh my. Rowing was big up and down through the Midwest. It really was, you know. Yeah, it was.
And what was your rowing experience? What position did you row in, and how did you do with it?
Well, I rowed in the barge, and I rowed in the junior 8 first, and then after you win a race, then you're classed as a senior. And then we got in the senior 8, and then there was 4 of us that got in the 4, and we'd get down here about daylight, get the 4 out, take it up the river about a mile and back, get to work about 7 o'clock, then come down that evening, and in the regular rowing crew, you know, the 8, and we'd make a lap up the river and back to that or whatever was scheduled for that night. And then we used to jump back in that Ford and make another pass like up the railroad bridge and back. And we were all big guys. And, we went to Central States and we won hand down the junior thing, you know. And it was interesting, you know. And this was a cockyless Ford, just a Ford guy.
So who was in the bow to steer that boat?
Bob Nicolay was in the bow, and he had his one pedal controlled the rudder.
And your experience was pretty good as a junior. Sounds like you guys were pretty tough.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, well, you know, it's your same old story. The more you practice, the better you get.
And when you were rowing, what was the collection of boats that the club had?
Well, let's see. We had 2/8s. We had the barge. We had 2 4s, one a cocky 4 and one without. And we had a couple of doubles and a couple of singles.
Well, you know, now that there's a class in rowing called the mixed, and in the mixed you get the same number of men and the same number of women, and they row together. But back then, I don't think they had that, but there was, I read in the paper, there was a women's 8.
We had a women's rowing team down here. I think it was 2 years, couple of years. Yeah. You know, members' wives, girlfriends or whatever, you know. And they did pretty good.
And they would compete as well?
Not with us in the
Right, but not against you, but
no,
they would compete against each other or against other clubs.
Yeah.
And tell us the story about how was it with a 66-foot long 8 that you could get it from Quincy to some other city. What arrangements did you make to move the boats?
Well, at that time, they'd make arrangements with the railroad, and they had some baggage cars that were long enough to put that 8 in. And we'd make arrangements ahead of time, of course. You know, we'd have it sitting on the tracks out here, and we'd load in, depending on the regatta, what boats we took, you know. But usually we'd take the 2/8s, and if they had a barge race that time, we'd take it, or otherwise we would. You take the 2/8s, 2 4s, a couple of doubles, and a couple of singles. And we had special racks that we had built, that we had kept here, that you'd put them in a railroad car, and you could lash them down, and you set one 8, and then you had another rack, and the other 8 went on top. And the same way with the 4s and doubles, you know. And we kept those from year to year, and that way we'd get them back home. We'd unload the boats and put the racks back in the basement. And we had them for next year.
And how was it that you'd make money to pay for regattas and pay for carriage on the railroad cars?
Well, years ago we had 2 quarter, 2 dime, and 2 nickel slot machines. And the membership used to play them. And in reality, and we had the bar, of course, you know. Homebrew, that was pretty cheap. And the homemade whiskey was pretty cheap at that time too, you know.
And would you have dances as fundraisers?
Oh yeah, we would have, different times we'd have fundraisers, but they used to have family dances and everything upstairs. And members would get together, a group of friends or something, want to rent the house or the hall for weddings or something like that. And we used to do that, but our main source of income, in all honesty, was those slot machines.
Well, that sounds
And they were set loose. You know, they paid more frequently than the ones you would have today.
I get it. So that would incentivize people.
Sure.
What happened in the club when the war started?
Well, World War II. Well, most of the younger guys ended up in the service. Which was a situation everywhere, you know. And I went into the service in January of '42 and stayed till the end of the war.
Did they suspend the rowing during the war, or did it?
If I remember correctly, they suspended it during the war.
Okay.
Because all the young guys were gone.
And were there any women rowing during the war?
I don't remember any women rowing during the war.
So when you came back from the war, did you row again for the club?
I think I rowed 1 year. And well, it was one of them things where you're raising a family. Of course, years ago, everybody raised families too.
Oh, yeah.
But it was different.
And did the focus of the club change after World War II?
Well, in this respect, yes. Because as barge traffic increased on the river, you can't get out on the river with barges. And the first big wave will bust them in 3 pieces, you know. So it really went downhill after, I'd say, 2 years.
So you couldn't use the big boat, the big barge boats. What about the eights?
Well, that 8, hell, that was, what, 60 feet long, you know.
Yeah.
You couldn't use them.
Because you'd get swamped by the barge weight.
Yeah, that's right. And they sold the boats to several different boat clubs. It seems to me Springfield got one, or I don't recall the exact details anymore. But
What was it, because the river had such barge traffic on it that people decided that it was not a very good place for rowing?
A combination of that and the fact that nobody wanted to expend that much effort anymore.
It was just too hard to work. It hurt too much.
It was hard work.
Yeah.
As you know.
Oh, yeah. Well.
As you know.
Yeah. Well, I hope we're going to get to have in September 17th or 16th, 2012, we'll have a rowing race that ends at the club. So.
Well, I'm hoping so too. You know, I think about the club all the time, and like I said, I'm the longest living member there now, and it's really been a part of me and my life, and I've enjoyed it.
Well, and if you were to say something to Quincy's young men and women about what rowing and rowing competition could do for a person, people that are kind of wishing that they were involved in some kind of an active thing to do on the river, what would you say to them?
Most of them don't want to expend that much effort, in all honesty.
Well, if
there are some that do, but the majority, they're watching the boob tube or these other little dams.
Well, if there were some people out there who were sort of restless and antsy and wanted to have some way to be on the river and like have an activity that they could try as hard as they possibly could, what would you tell them that they could get out of the experience if they would do it like you young people did back when you were on the river?
Good physical shape.
All right. Well, thanks.
Good physical shape.